Whether you crank everything up to hard or turn on creative or story mode, here are 5 reasons there's no correct difficulty in games. There's a lot of discussion around playing in hard or easy mode. Should we have a choice? Should we be ashamed to put things on easy? Should some games only be set to ultra hard, and should you have to sit on an uncomfortable chair at the same time? Well, the answer of course is that we should always have a choice, and there should be no guilt in switching things to easy every so often. And for this video, we've included a poll to see how you approach difficulty in games. And as ever, remember to subscribe to the channel now for more videos about the science and psychology of games. So, from the science of frustration to the joy of simple immersion, here are 5 reasons why there's no right difficulty when it comes to games. It's existential question time, and this is only the first entry. Is there such a thing as an objectively hard game? Do we all find the same games difficult? And why, when a game forces us to play one section over, and indeed over again, are we compelled to play even more instead of less? Well, the helpful thing is that because we're all different, of course we don't all find the same things hard in games. Frustratingly though, this does mean that we can push the keyboard in front of a friend and they'll get something right in one go that you've spent the last half hour swearing at. A good definition of difficulty then would be requiring a certain element of skill in order to progress. Perfectly balanced acceleration in Trials Rising, for instance, or a one-bro run in Dark Souls. This means a serious challenge for developers who have to create a perfect difficulty curve that's hard but not challenging enough that it makes you want to throw your mouse out of a window. The article Measuring the Difficulty of Video Games by Maria Virginia Ponte and Guillaume Louise discusses exactly this, that difficulty in games is actually intrinsically linked to our enjoyment. Referencing what's known as the theory of flow, Ponte and Louise state that a player is in a flow status and thus enjoying the game when the task is neither too hard nor too easy. They say that it's not enough to create tension situations and to give the player choices to resolve this tension, but good game design must accurately scale the difficulty of a challenge to have a tension level that leads to the player's enjoyment. So challenge then appears to be a vital component of why we enjoy games so much. So it would be fair to say that psychologically we enjoy the challenge of video games. But what about those of us who just aren't content to keep things on normal? Well, it turns out that there are plenty of explanations for your seemingly suicidal choice of ultra hard mode. I've referenced it before on the channel, but the article This Drives Me Nuts, How Gaming Technologies Can Elicit Positive Experiences by Means of Negative Emotions by Stefano Traberti comes in very handy here. Not only does Traberti talk about the general unpleasant atmosphere of some video games that still manage to make us feel good, but he also talks about failure in games, repeated attempts at the same challenge that instead of making us walk away, actually compel us to continue. Traberti references video game theorist Jesper Juhl, who talks about the promise of video games, that while the odds might be against us, video games promise that we can resolve our sense of inadequacy. Incredibly, when we crank games up to seriously hard difficulty levels, we're the ones who've done this to ourselves, but video games promise that we can succeed. This might not be how you like to spend your precious gaming hours, but there's definitely something appealing about this sense of triumph and success. Knowing that you've beaten what appeared to be your limitations, even if the game was what made you feel inadequate in the first place. It's only through this play, as Traberti says, that one can feel the emotions related to the experience of a failure, and consequently, a pleasant emotional relief when the emotion-eliciting stimulus has been reappraised thanks to a final success. Phew. So that's plenty of reasons that people enjoy challenging themselves with games, but that's not the only reason we enjoy playing. Whether it's a little indie gem or a big budget blockbuster, we load up these other universes to be surrounded by their worlds, not necessarily to spend the whole time worrying about how many med packs we have left. We've actually done a whole video on usually stressful games that can be made relatively peaceful for when you want a different kind of experience. This doesn't mean turning off the challenge, but just concentrating on other things. Mass Effect 3, for instance, has a narrative combat difficulty mode if you just want to spend time romancing aliens, while Soma lets you turn on a story mode that lets you wander through its claustrophobic world. This isn't giving up, but instead focusing on another element of game exploration.
And that's important. Humans are complex, emotional creatures. We don't always want one thing. You might wake up one morning and really want one particular breakfast cereal, or just all the eggs. Our desires for how we experience game worlds is exactly the same thing, whether we want challenge or just to become lost in a fascinating new world.
Immersive is a word we see a lot in games. The more real the game world is, the more we feel like we're actually there. Jamie Madigan, in his article The Psychology of Immersion in Video Games, talks about us becoming lost in games in various ways. 1. Through what he calls completeness of information, citing Assassin's Creed 2's busy streets. 2. Through what he calls cognitively demanding environments, where we have to concentrate on the world in order to progress. And 3. Experiencing a strong and interesting narrative.
An easier difficulty then, or a game where a challenge just isn't the point, let us experience each of these immersive features. These games let us wander around in worlds that draw us in and entertain us without necessarily having to put our reaction times through the ringer as well.
There's challenging, and then there's playing in front of thousands of people as you play a game professionally against like-minded cognitive athletes. The difficulty of eSports is an entirely different experience again. The only setting here is against other people's brains, and that's a serious proposition that can't be quantified. This is taking difficulty to a new athletic level, and the psychology associated with this is the same as other sporting tournaments.
As we talked about in our video on becoming an eSports pro, this is a level of difficulty that needs mental preparation as well as practice for up to 10 hours a day on multiple game modes. This is a challenge in itself, as putting in a shift on the modes you'd rather not play is a serious test of your mental mettle.
When it comes to tournaments themselves, there's also the issue commonly known as tilt, a term that has its origins in professional poker. Put simply, this is your brain reacting to a loss and losing your temper. Despite the fact that you're playing your best, unlike the game itself beating you, you might still be losing against other players. That's a serious mental challenge that you've got to deal with, but one that isn't unsurmountable. Again, this is clearly what professional esports players thrive on, but it doesn't have to be up everyone's street.
So far, we've only talked about reactive difficulty, and by that we mean the ways games test your perception and skill. But this entry is all about how games can challenge you emotionally and why that matters for entirely different reasons.
When you saw the name on this entry, you were probably expecting a Telltale game, and we're not about to disappoint you. Games like The Walking Dead are famous for forcing players to make hard choices. There are no easy answers. You will make bad decisions, and it's the consequences of these decisions that are especially interesting. I'm talking about guilt.
Now, I've discussed guilt in games before, but this is slightly different. That video was more about being ashamed, but feeling guilty after making a morally challenging decision in games can actually be good for you.
In his paper Being Bad in a Video Game Can Make Us More Morally Sensitive, Matthew Grizzard concluded that players who acted immorally in a game and felt guilty as a result became more sensitive to similar moral issues in real life. And this is maybe why these choices are so hard. Once we're fully engaged with a game, our brains subconsciously prepare us for the emotional consequences of immoral decisions.
Of course, this only works if you're properly invested in a game. Nobody's going to lose sleep after stealing sweet rolls in Skyrim. But as games become more nuanced and immersive, these choices will only become more difficult and, as a consequence, more emotionally enriching. So that's 5 reasons why there's no perfect difficulty level in games. Let us know what your favourite setting is and why in the comments below. Drop us a like if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe to Logitech G for more videos just like this one. If you do already subscribe, thank you, then don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you know when our next video lands.